intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining a Wednesday edition of Point of View. And one of the reasons I say the date is because after a while, some of us lose track of the days. Of course, when I'm doing radio every day, usually I keep it in my head, but I even had it happen to me briefly this morning because I was thinking about some material I needed to get to somebody before the Thursday afternoon Zoom meeting. And I thought, wait a minute, it's only Wednesday. We're okay. I've got another day before that has to for sure be given to those individuals. So again, it is Wednesday, and even so, we have some great material. Matter of fact, just in about a half an hour, we're going to have Rick Green with us. He's been on the program with us before. One of the founders of Patriot Academy, has been associated with David Barton, and actually is a great speaker talking about some of the constitutional principles of America. We'll be talking about his really insightful article, Stop Quarantining the Constitution. And a lot of what he has to say is about what the Governor Greg Abbott, has done, although all of this applies across the country. And so we'll start with some of the national examples that we use, some of which I even mentioned today in my Viewpoints commentary. So that's coming up. We also have an action alert, which I'll wait till maybe the 1 o'clock hour to begin to focus on, but there's an opportunity for you to express your opinion to members of Congress about some of these issues that we've been talking about here, especially to these senators. So we'll talk about that, and that's just one of a couple of action alerts we're going to have over the next couple of weeks, so that is the case. And then the next hour, we will get into a little bit more about what is happening in terms of this pandemic. And then also in the second hour, or it would be the first hour for the national audience, we'll have Dr. Michael Austin with us, how Christians founded healthcare and hospitals. At a time when we're talking about healthcare and hospital, let's remind ourselves of the legacy of the gospel, the legacy of Christians. And then in the third hour, the 2 o'clock hour, we'll be talking about Human Coalition's virtual clinic model, because more and more of this is sort of telemedicine. So all of that is the case. And a lot of people are starting to suggest that maybe we are turning the corner, which is why we're going to have more and more discussions about is it possible to have an end game or an exit strategy. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting because the CDC director says we're nearing the peak, but the model from University of Washington, which has oftentimes been cited in the past, maybe a little extreme, nevertheless, actually says we're a few days past the peak of deaths and hospital usage. So we'll get into those questions. And so much of what I thought would be our discussion this week would be when, if, how we begin to go back to something that looks a little bit like normal, even if it becomes the new normal. And yesterday I shared with you the fact that you had a number of Democratic governors in the Northeast, led in part by Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor there in New York. Since that time, they've added one more. All of the others were Democrats, but they've also now added a Republican in Massachusetts, which is sort of mentioned that I thought it would be appropriate, since they had New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut and Delaware and Rhode Island. One of the outliers might be Massachusetts. Well, now a Republican governor is joined with those Democratic governors. And the same sort of thing is happening in California, led again, in this case, by Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, trying to put together sort of a West Coast coalition of California, Oregon, and Washington. Now, in the midst of that, this is our first slam on President Trump. We're going to have a few today, so if you love President Trump, don't take offense. But when the President of the United States comes out and says, my authority is total, That's the way it's got to be. It's total. The governors know that. No, Mr. President, it is not. Now, one of the things I've done is not only cite some of the comments made by some of the people that obviously would disagree with him, but one of our articles here is actually from CNN, and it's an interview that was done with the Representative Liz Cheney, who, by the way, is the third highest ranking House Republican. Not a person we quote that often, but certainly in this case we do. And her comments were, I think, as appropriate as anybody's. The federal government does not have absolute power, you think? She goes on to simply say, let's, if we can, just consult the 10th Amendment, which says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, no prohibited to it by the states, are reversed to the states and the people. And that, of course, is the 10th Amendment. And, of course, all of this has to do with the president making this comment that, indeed, his powers are absolute. And if nothing else, it illustrates what Jonah Goldberg has pointed out in one of his pieces, this kind of flip-flop that you get from this president, who at one point was making a case just 3 days ago that we quote, I'm quoting from the president now, we have this Constitution, and the stay-at-home orders that you want me to issue for the entire nation are not what I have the authority to do. Instead, we want the governors running things, which is a direct quote from the president. And so that received all sorts of accolades from all sorts of conservatives. Matter of fact, there was an article in the Federalist that said why states governing themselves during the coronavirus outbreak is a good thing. So he was getting a pat on the back from some of the conservatives, but then a couple of days later talks about this total authority that he has. Reminiscent of the previous president, you remember when President Barack Obama made a big point about the fact that, I really can't do as much as I'd like to do because I'm limited by the Constitution. But then over time said, I really have my pen and my phone, so I think I really can do everything that I want to do. And if there's ever been a case for term limits, it's maybe that we should have a term limit of 4 years for the president. Because if you look at it, most of the scandals that presidents have ever had usually happen in their second term. Nixon, Reagan, Iran-Contra, Bill Clinton, of course, all sorts of things there. Even a little bit of Barack Obama and even this case as well. There's almost as which president after a while gets so convinced that he has that power that he says, as Barack Obama was heard on mic saying, well, after the election, I'll have a lot more flexibility. And so here's one more example of this. And sadly, the president is at least partially right in that after he says I have total power, he's talking about the kind of threat that he can actually give to the governors. And it was reminiscent of another president that thought he had absolute power, Richard Nixon, who decided that he was going to declare that the nation would have 55-mile-an-hour speed limits. And a lot of people said, well, you can't enforce that. Well, he passed it in 1974, and then shortly thereafter it was really implemented by Gerald Ford and then later by Jimmy Carter. But they didn't have that kind of authority, but here's the carrot and stick that they used. Either you actually in your states have 55-mile-an-hour speed limits, or we will withdraw any kind of federal highway funds from your particular state. Everybody fell in line. There's a sense in which, sadly, the president is right. Even though the president does not have absolute authority, if you have the power of the purse, there are ways in which you can be very influential with your money or lack of money that is provided by the federal government to the state. So, sadly, even though he does not have absolute authority, his next statement was a reminder that he's not the first president to say, yeah, I really do have the authority to withhold funds, and in that way make a lot of the governors fall in line. But we still have a 10th Amendment. At least I think we do. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We are told by medical experts and politicians that we have to set aside many of our constitutional rights during the lockdown in order to keep people safe. And we're assured that this sacrifice of our freedoms is only temporary. But are we setting a precedent? Who would have predicted that a virus would become the justification for some governors and mayors to lay siege to our civil liberties? 6 months ago, if I told you that political leaders would close down nearly every church service, even on Easter, and close down huge sectors of our society, would you believe it? Even many of the most dedicated preppers would have had difficulty believing it, yet here we are. A retired UK Supreme Court justice explained his concern. The real problem is that when human societies lose their freedom, it's not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It's usually because people willingly surrender their freedom in return for protection against some external threat. And the threat is usually a real threat, but usually exaggerated. The other side of that equation is also disturbing. Not only do citizens willingly give up their freedoms, but governments are traditionally reluctant to give up power once that was granted to them during a crisis. Once we give government leaders power, they find it hard to return to the previous status quo. Some of the worst threats to freedom can be seen in other countries when government leaders implement the most draconian rules and regulations. America's dedication to limited government and federalism have provided some protection against such action so far. But let's remember that we have had some governors and mayors threaten to permanently close down churches, gun stores, and a number of other establishments. And that's why we need to make sure we aren't setting a precedent during this pandemic crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, for just another couple of minutes, talk about President Trump. And then I'm going to talk about the draft that is coming together on how to reopen the country. And again, this is why I think it is good to do it by committee. One, because it, I think, provides some protection for the governors, for the president, and others. And number two, I think you just recognize some of the instincts of the president right now, who is in a tough situation, but nevertheless, I think illustrates why, in some respects, having an individual that has not been in the political realm sometimes is helpful, as it has been with this president, because they think outside the box, but also is dangerous because they're not thinking about things like the 10th Amendment. We were so more protected by having governors who became presidents because the governors understood this, whether it was Governor Jimmy Carter, Governor Ronald Reagan, Governor Bill Clinton, Governor George W. Bush. And sometimes when you have an individual that is not a governor, maybe a senator, like Senator Lyndon Johnson, Senator Barack Obama, they push the envelope a little too hard and sometimes think they have a lot more power because all of a sudden now they're not one of 100 people in the Senate, but they're the president of the United States. And the real danger is when you bring in a business person, a businessman, whether it was Ross Perot back in the 1990s, it was almost every day during the campaign he was saying things that were not only unconstitutional and going against constitutional limits to power, but also just sort of wrong-headed. And, of course, when your campaign is run by individuals who have been the sycophants that helped you run your business, and when you really can run your business kind of like a dictator, then you bring some of those same tendencies into government. In this case, Ross Perot was not elected, But Donald Trump was, and so we see some of this as well. And so I do like kind of how Jonah Goldberg sums it up. He says the president does not have total authority. He does not have absolute power, but he wants people to think that he does. And he says Trump's reversal on federalism. First he was for federalism, then on Monday he was against it. Now he's back again. Actually, insisting he didn't say it in the first place, but of course we have on tape. It makes no sense if you think that Trumpism is a coherent ideological framework. It makes complete sense if you work from the assumption that Donald Trump is guided by his desire for importance and his desire to be the center of attention. And so it illustrates, again, one of the real concerns when you have somebody that comes into power that has not necessarily worked the levers of power as a governor or other individuals maybe in Congress, and that's what you are dealing with some of the comments being made at the moment. By the way, I might just mention that the reason I suspect the president came back and then denied saying this and came back to his view of federalism is due to the vice president, Mike Pence. And if you remember back when he was running, there were a number of people, especially on the conservative side, and especially even some on the Christian right, that were saying, if you become president, we are only going to feel comfortable if you put somebody like Mike Pence in with you. And so Mike Pence, I think, on a number of occasions, has maybe been able to pull the president aside and say, Mr. President, you just simply cannot say that. Why can't I? Because the Constitution prohibits it. And so that is the case. But I wonder why Mike Pence didn't pull the president aside on this one. Because if you have not seen this, the Treasury Department now has ordered that President Donald Trump's name be printed on all the stimulus checks. Now, I just heard from a friend today that the stimulus checks will be mailed out, but already if you have something where they have your bank, you've already received your $1,200 or your $2,400. So people that actually filed their taxes through their bank are already receiving the money. Those of us that did not do that and tend to mail our checks in, well, now those checks are going to be later than were expected because now the Internal Revenue Service and the Treasury Department have to go and print the name Donald Trump on the checks, which again is just a good example of the level of ego of some of the individuals that make their way into the Oval Office. A lot of people say, well, this president's a narcissist. You think? Was the previous president one? Yes, of course, nobody actually pointed that out that tended to like him. But I would have to say that we've had a couple in that Oval Office, and that's a source of some concern. But I think the bigger concern you have is not what is happening in the Oval Office or what's happened in the press conference. That is, when can we go back to work? And we now have, and I've posted this on the website for you to read this, a look at least the draft plan. Now, of course, the draft plan could be different than the final, but it does look like from some of the material posted by The Hill and by the Washington Post that there has now been sort of a draft executive summary that was worked on by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and makes it clear that states and localities will actually be making that decision when to reopen their areas, back to our argument of federalism. And one of the quotes in the document, decisions on reopening and alternately on intensifying mitigation will be made by the local and state level with guidance and support from the federal level. So hopefully that will be the case. It has 3 phases. First of all, preparing the nation to reopen with a national campaign of communication. Then community readiness assessment, which will probably happen May 1st, and then an effort through May 15th of ramping up the manufacturing of testing kits and personal protective equipment and increasing emergency funding. Now, how will they determine where that opening will take place? And there are a number of parameters. First of all, the incidence of infection is genuinely low. If you look at the sick map right now, you recognize that almost all through the Midwest, especially up to the upper Midwest, there are very few examples of individuals that have COVID-19, at least that have been documented. So that could be the case, or specific areas of production where individuals still wearing masks and keeping distance could open up production facilities. The second is a well-functioning monitor system capable of detecting any increase in incidence of infection. And then also located there, a public health system that could react quickly, or to use their words, react robustly to cases of COVID-19 that might surface, and a healthcare system that has sufficient enough inpatient beds and staffing to rapidly scale up and deal if there was a surge in cases. So these criteria are going to be used ultimately by the states in conjunction with the federal government to see if we can reopen parts of the country. And if that is indeed the case, that provides an opportunity to at least get some things moving. And, of course, getting things moving, even in the state of Texas, is going to be really important. Have you seen the price of gasoline at the pump? I mean, the other day I paid $1.19, but that's not the issue you want to pay attention to. When it used to be that you were paying $100 a barrel, then $60 a barrel, then $30 a barrel, now it's $20 a barrel, and today it's actually even lower than that. You can recognize that if we can't get the economy moving pretty quickly, a lot of people producing oil in the state of Texas are going to be out of business. The best estimates are that you need at least $30 a barrel to just even pay the expenses right now, and so now that it has dropped so low, there are some real concerns about what that might mean. So that's another aspect of getting the economy moving, because it is not just affecting the small oil producers or even the small companies. Did you notice this one the other day? Disney is losing $30 million a day. Disney. Because what? They've closed down all the theme parks. They aren't able to produce any movies that are producing income. Who's going to go on a Disney cruise ship right now? And, Disney owns ESPN. How many people watching ESPN? Disney is losing $30 million a day. That's just one example. But when we come back from the break, we're going to get into the fact that we've been quarantining people. But what about quarantining the Constitution? That's the argument from Rick Green, and so we're going to spend some time looking at some of the things he's writing about. He's, of course, given us a little bit of an understanding of what's been happening nationwide, and I've given you some of those examples. But then he begins to focus on even what's happening here in the state of Texas as an illustration of that as well. So if you'd like to join the conversation as we talk with Rick Green, 1-800-351-1212. A couple of questions that we'll put on the table there, and then a little bit later we'll get into some of the other issues facing this nation in terms of the quarantine, the pandemic, and much more. And if you find yourself wanting to read a few of these articles that we'll be quoting, they're available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In fact, once again, let me just mention that my Viewpoints commentary today is called Losing Liberty, and it fits very well with this article that we're going to be talking about now, Stop Quarantining the Constitution. I talked about the fact that some people were already pointing out a few weeks ago that we might be losing some of our liberty, and really, if you look at the history of nations, oftentimes individuals give up their liberty because of a real threat, which oftentimes is exaggerated. And then when it comes time to once again get back to normal, sometimes governments are reluctant to give up that power. So that is a commentary I wrote a while back. But I also, when I'd seen this very good piece by Rick Green, asked if we could perhaps get him on the program. And it turns out, they found out today, he could actually join us. So the correlation between his article, which we've posted on the website, pointofview.net, and my commentary fit very well. Rick Green, if you're not familiar, of course, is the individual that has founded Patriot Academy, a dynamic speaker who speaks to all sorts of people across the country and really educates them about America's godly heritage as well as our constitutional rights. And so, Rick Green, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, my friend. Always good to be with you, even during these crazy times.
Well, it is a crazy time, and I want to get into it because you start your piece by giving us some examples, some of which we've used as well, whether it is the conversation that we'll have with Kelly Shackelford on Friday, where he's tried to defend churchgoers in Mississippi and a pastor, whether it's a Kentucky governor or whether it's an individual that was just out on his paddleboard in California that then is chased down by the police and handcuffed. You give some of the same examples in your article. And as you've been following this, it seems like we're losing some of our constitutional liberties. Tell us more, if you might.
You know, sometimes we just have to stop and pause in the panic and the chaos and actually think through things. Imagine that, having a sound mind, as we're told in Timothy. And let me, look, I know you've said this, I've said this, the virus is serious, it's deadly for a small percentage of our society. And so, look, we respect life. We value life. And so we're all for taking steps to save lives. And, I'm a former legislator. I'm a Constitution coach. I believe there's, certainly a role for government in situations like this. And none of us are saying we should sit back and do nothing. But the problem is we truly do, and you've spoken to this over the years, and we've talked about it before, that due to our national ignorance in history and the Constitution, we have leaders who have overreacted, frankly, with both unnecessary and, I think most importantly, I would call them overtly tyrannical power grabs. And it's to the point where, as you mentioned, we're making it a criminal offense to go for a drive in your car, to play t-ball with your 6-year-old, to even visit a family member, or to sit in your church parking lot in your car so you can worship with your church family, even when you're literally sealed off from each other. It's something out of it feels like a dystopian novel. And I guess the part I'm frustrated about is that, and the mind-boggling part is, it was absolutely unnecessary. We didn't have to do the things we're doing. And I was even reading this morning Matthew Henry's commentary on 2 Timothy, and this whole idea of a sound mind. We as Christians are not to have a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. And Henry describes power as courage there, and he describes sound mind as sober, solid thinking. And rather than responding with emotion and panic, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be fighting this virus with scientifically based, economically rational responses, and we can protect our constitutional freedoms while doing that. This is no time to abandon the principles of liberty. It's actually the most important time to hold on to them and preserve them.
One of the things you don't want to be is in Lansing, Michigan today because of the governor in Michigan. The plan is to have about 15,000 cars and trucks to protest some of her draconian requirements and orders, which I think are all unconstitutional. And she's doing it, according to people that are up there in Michigan, due in large part because she wants to be the vice presidential nominee with Joe Biden. Go figure. But nevertheless, we can leave Michigan for for a moment, but a lot of our listeners this hour actually are in the state of Texas. And so you say, okay, we don't have to look at Michigan. We can even look at the state of Texas, a governor who I know you appreciate, who nevertheless had some orders that are of concern to you. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, Governor Abbott's a friend, and I've always been a supporter of his. And ironically, for the first 2 weeks of this thing, was bragging on him and talking about how great he was doing in terms of having a balanced approach and not jumping on these, literally following the herd off the cliff with Governor Newsom and the Cuomo and the other, now 43 governors that have done complete statewide lockdowns, unprecedented, unconstitutional, never done it in our history, incredibly awful results that are going to come from this that we're going to feel months and years from now. And he had refused to do that. He had done the things that we did do back in 1918 with the Spanish flu, close down theaters and large public gatherings in the big cities, which makes sense. You don't do it everywhere, but he did do statewide on that, which I didn't think that was necessary, but I could live with that at the time when we all thought 2 million people were going to die and nobody knew for sure how this was all going to play out. And so an immediate response to the public gatherings I supported. But then, and there I was making these constitutional minute videos and going through what governments could and couldn't do and should and shouldn't do and bragging on Governor Abbott. And then the next day after I released one of those videos bragging on him, he issued the same statewide, stay-at-home order, essentially house arrest. He didn't call it all the same things that the other governors did, but it did the exact same thing. And the part that really, really bothered me, this is frightening to me, is the part where he quoted a statute that is designed for,
Yes.
a hurricane comes through an area, it wipes out everything. You got crime and looting and that sort of thing. Or, to be more specific to our current situation, smallpox is suddenly in a neighborhood or in a community, and so you need to literally keep people from going in and out of that disaster area. And so there's a statute that gives him the quote unquote power to control the ingress and egress of people in that area. And he claimed that statute gave him the power to do that with every human being in Texas, even if you're out in Pecos, Texas, and there's not a single case of coronavirus and there's no threat and your hospitals are empty. And I mean, it was just a massive overreach. And look, I want to say all of these public officials, I get it that they are under tremendous pressure. They're scared. They don't want to be the one that didn't do enough and people died. And I get that. These are tough decisions. And so that's why I supported taking certain steps. But these overreach steps, in the face of science now showing us that it's actually making it worse, not making it better, it makes no sense at this point. I mean, they should be backing off, letting people go to work that can do so safely, and have a little faith in people to be able to make their workplaces safer and keep people social distancing. I mean, we've fallen into this idea, Kerby, and I think it's a spiritual issue, really, when you get down to it. I think we want government to save us, and because we're a more secular society now, as a nation, we're more afraid of death. And we are willing to give up our liberty for a perceived safety, whereas when there's a more solid and more permeating spiritual foundation in the culture, you're less willing to do that because you don't fear death as much. You have a faith that there is life after death and that the scientists aren't God, and so I think all of those things come to play, and the reason we've let this happen, and frankly our people have cheered on our public officials in doing it. I mean, look at the polling data, 80% approval for these governors that are shutting down their states and destroying millions of lives. It's eerie.
We're going to take a break, and we will continue with Rick Green for a little bit longer. But again, we have this piece on stop quarantining the government, and you might say, or the Constitution, I should say. And again,
maybe we should quarantine the government.
Yeah, we should do that. That was a slip, because that's kind of what I was going to say. Maybe it's time to quarantine these government leaders, but that was a slip of the tongue there. But also, it has this part about the statute. You might want to see what he says about the fact that this is a statute for devastating disasters, and then goes on to simply talk about the fact that the government in some of these various states, or the governor even in the state of Texas, has decided to control ingress and egress And this is the land of come and take it. And now we're starting to have shelter in place or stay at home. Now, I didn't use those words, but that's what we have. And as he points out, never in the history have we seen such an overreach of power. And the greater concern is that once this has been implemented, do we create a precedent for the future? So I want to come back and talk a little bit more about this, because even today we find out about one judge actually saying that now they want to force health departments to provide the names of any of the coronavirus patients. Now, first of all, that seems to be not only a violation of the Constitution, but HIPAA rules. So we've got individuals going in directions I never would have anticipated. So we'll come back and talk more about that with Rick Green right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes talking about this very good piece by Rick Green, Quarantining the Constitution. And it relates to some of the booklets that we make available to those of you that actually donate to Point of View. This booklet I'm holding up here, Biblical View on Constitutional Interpretation. What are your rights, and how should we interpret the Constitution? And then this one, which I want to get to right now, this one is a biblical view on privacy and surveillance. Because, Rick, first of all, we recognize that we have to seek some remedies, and we know that some governors, I'll certainly focus most of our attention at the moment on the governor in the state of Michigan, who is completely gone off the rails. But even here, we talk about the governor here in the state of Texas has done some things that are unprecedented. And there's some ways to react to it. Number one, of course, we'll have Kelly Shackelford with us on Friday, and he at First Liberty, as well as a variety of others at Alliance Defending Freedom, have gotten some lawsuits because of what's happened in Mississippi and Kentucky and a variety of other places. Number two, of course, we can vote at the ballot box, which we certainly have this opportunity come this November. But I think there's a third issue, and that is sometimes we just have to say no, because when we look at what is being used right now in China and in South Korea, where they're using all sorts of creative ways to surveil individuals, and now they're talking about even possibly here, maybe we'd have to issue immunity passports, which I think is kind of interesting, because one of the comments I'm going to make later on is now in Virginia, they no longer have voter ID laws. So you don't have to have any identification to vote, but you might have to have identification to show that you don't have the virus. Or they're using these cell phone-based tracking apps. I think somewhere along the line, we need to stand up and say, wait a minute, we don't just dislike big government. We also dislike big tech that's making it possible for some of this kind of surveillance. What are your thoughts?
I couldn't believe. Bill Gates calling for chips to be implanted for this kind of thing. It is completely surreal. It's like we've woken up in an Orwellian world for sure, and definitely huge constitutional problems with so many of these things that are being done. And it's almost like the mindset has been, well, because we all agree that look, if Ebola breaks out and you got a 50% mortality rate, you don't want people running through the streets giving it to people. So there is a place for quarantining the sick. There's a place for, and some have used the terminology of suspending constitutional rights or whatever, or postpone. I think that's terrible language to use.
Yes.
But there's a place where those are restricted, for an emergency like that. But we've taken that mindset or that idea of a smallpox outbreak or something like that, and we've allowed it to just open Pandora's box to say, well, then anything's on the table. We should just give up any of these constitutional rights in order to save, as Cuomo said, one life, which, Kirby, I'm sure you thought the same thing whenever he said that. It's like, oh, great, I'm sure he's going to be at the March for Life next year to he's suddenly pro-life and wants to save those that are most vulnerable among us. I don't hear them. They're actually thinking that it's essential to still kill babies, but it's not essential to be able to counsel a young lady and save a life. It's unbelievable. But anyway, yes, I totally agree with you. I mean, this is going to be there's going to be a lot of major legal battles in the coming weeks over what they can do with your health records related to this, whether or not you can have a forced vaccination. I mean, this is going to be a huge battle. Frankly, I'm very interested in the legal battles for small businesses that have had a regulatory taking at this point. I mean, their company has been shut down to the point of a lot of them will not be able to come back and survive it. And so do they have a case against the government for destroying their business? And those cases are typically found to rest on how long do you do this. If you believed in the beginning that this was absolutely necessary to stop a pandemic, which, again, if we knew our history better and what we did or didn't do in 1918, we wouldn't have gone as far as we did this time, because that was far worse than what we have now, and we didn't come anywhere close. But even if that government official was convinced of that, there is no reason for that government official to still be convinced of that now. Here we are a month later, and we're finding that the death rate is way, way lower than we thought, that way more people have it and had it than we thought. It is not turning out to be much worse than a really bad year of the flu. We're looking at countries like Sweden that did not lock down, and they're no worse off than us. In other words, the science and the data and the evidence no longer backs up a government's compelling interest to destroy lives right now in order to save other lives. That argument is going out the window very fast right now.
Let's talk about the economy, because that's kind of the point you're making just before I let you go. And you quote from Matt Rinaldi, who's been on the program with us before, former representative, who said, this current course was akin to burning your house down to fight a termite infestation. And so there is a sense in which people are saying, well, maybe we can get back to something that looks like normal, but it's going to require maybe a little bit of a cost-benefit evaluation. And so the purists out there say, well, you should never talk about trade-offs. And I go, really? In my column yesterday, I point out that let's just take the speed limit. If everybody drove 25 miles an hour, there'd be fewer deaths on the highways. But we recognize that according to one estimate, for every 5 mile per hour increase in the highway speed limit, the fatalities raise about 8.5%. So we recognize that sometimes we have trade-offs, and the idea that we will not remove these restrictions until no one is contracting the disease and no one else dies is fallacious, because it's not how we do any other aspect of public policy, is it?
Oh, if it was, we would shut down every year for the flu. If it was, we would, like you said, we'd have 25 mile per hour speed limits so that you could cut those death rates almost down to 1% of what they are. I mean, life includes risks, and life includes death. I mean, that's part of what is just kind of weird to me at this point, is that the attitude is that that we should do all of these things, destroying lives in other ways in order to save a handful of lives over here, and not even looking at the fact that how many suicides you're going to have, how many people are going to die just because of poverty and poor health care and poor, all of those things when you destroy an economy. And even when you look at the CDC stats, the latest ones that came out, I think yesterday, I need to update my article on this, but in Texas, we've had, according to those numbers, 84, at the time we've had 84 COVID deaths. There were 289 flu deaths. So I'm not a math whiz, but that's like 3.5, I think, times as many died from the flu. 40,000 Texans died in that same period from something. And so it just seems like we're not looking at the big picture. And you probably shared it. If not, I would encourage you to share C.S. Lewis's what he said about the atomic bomb, but
yes.
Replace atomic bomb. Have you done? I mean, it's so perfect because we've done that. We focused so much, and so people walked around in fear at that time over the atomic bomb and basically shut down their lives. And he was saying, what are we doing? Hey, if it comes, it comes. And if it does, let it find us doing the Lord's work, and living our lives. And that's the American spirit. I mean, this business of we're going to shut everything down and destroy our nation over this. I mean, look, the guys in 1918, the nation fought World War I and defeated Spanish flu, even though it killed 700,000 Americans. This one's not even going to come close to that. They did that at the exact same time, and only a small little dip in the economy, and they didn't shut anything down except in the big cities. They shut down some big gatherings, right, and some of the theaters and stuff. I mean, World War II, we win that, and in both of those instances, we came out of it stronger. We are a nation that typically charges into battle, charges into fights like this, and for some reason, we haven't done that in this case. And
yes.
I'm hoping we can shake ourselves out of this and turn around and let people go back to work. Let those businesses find ways. Let the ingenuity of the American people step up. Government has made this worse.
Yes.
Government was the reason we didn't have the testing. It was all the FDA restrictions and regulations. My fear, Kirby, maybe we'll do another show sometime on this, my fear is that the take-home lesson from this for the average American is that we need government to be bigger and stronger and save us, instead of the take-home message being we need government in certain areas, but what we really need is freedom. Freedom is what will provide for more people to have prosperity, better health care, save more lives.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. This is, of course, our Wednesday broadcast, and I always mention that because after a while these days run together for so many of us, so I just thought I'd provide that as a public service. This hour, we're going to spend some time talking about what does it look like to reopen the country, which, of course, has led to a little bit of controversy in which the president said, well, I have the absolute authority. No, you don't, Mr. President. There's something called the 10th Amendment on that, but let's give at least credit where credit is due, and that is he has created a council to reopen America. It has, of course, everything from his daughter to her husband and Steve Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow and Wilbur Ross and a variety of others, including, I think, Mark Cuban's on it and all sorts of luminaries. So we'll certainly get into what it means to open this country up, what's being proposed by the president, what's being proposed by some of the governors. But also, I'm going to, before this half hour is up, spend some time also encouraging you to send a note to your senators. And that has to do with the fact that our latest action alert is about protecting our pharmaceutical supply chain. You may not know, but a majority of our active pharmaceutical ingredients for drugs come from China. We need to change that, and we're going to talk about what you can do to contact your two senators to support a piece of legislation being proposed by Senator Tom Cotton, a senator from Arkansas. As a matter of fact, somebody that I feature rather significantly in tomorrow's Viewpoints commentary, so we have all of that as well. But the question many of you have had is, are we going to open up this country? And if indeed we are, what can we do? And there are some very good pieces that are suggesting maybe we are starting to turn the corner on this. That is interesting because you've had the CDC director saying we're nearing the peak. But you also have, interestingly enough, the University of Washington model, the one we cited that oftentimes had too high in expectations and maybe we're calling for more social distancing and estimates that were maybe too high. But the University of Washington model says we're maybe even a few days past the peak in terms of death and hospital usage. So that is the case. But the big question, of course, is, and this is why testing is going to be really important, how many people are asymptomatic? Because if we allow people to get back to work, if at first we do this for maybe industries and production facilities where a lot of the production's done by robots, but you have individuals spaced rather significantly apart from each other that have masks, you could do that. But what about individuals in the cubicle next to you that may be carrying COVID-19 but are asymptomatic, don't know that they're sick, that you don't know they're sick, and yet you might be the one coming down with that. So that's something we'll get into, but let's, if we can, give you a little bit of a peek so far at the draft that has been put together. This is done in conjunction with some of these individuals, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Emergency Management, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and some of the others. And if you'd like to read more about that, we do have this, of course, on our website. And the article says that decisions on reopening and alternatively on intensifying mitigation will be made at the local and state level with guidance and support from the federal level. And according to the Washington Post, what you see right now in one of the articles is we would be, first of all, in a phase right now of national communication and a communication campaign. Then you would also have community readiness assessment until May 1st. And then through May 15th, ramping up of manufacturing various testing kits and personal protective equipment. And so how do you determine where you're going to actually open things up? And there's a number of criteria. I won't go into them in a lot of detail, but first of all, where the incidence of infection is genuinely low. We do have a number of states around the country where there are very, very few people that have tested positive for COVID-19. Also, that you'd have a well-functioning monitoring system capable of detecting any increase in incidence of infection. And then most importantly, that you have a public health system that could react quickly, or as they put it, react robustly to all cases of COVID-19 or any kind of surge, and that you have enough inpatient beds and staffing to scale up if indeed some kind of latent surge takes place. So that's the kind of work that's taking place. And as I mentioned yesterday, a number of the governors are putting together various ways to respond. I talked, for example, about what at the time were 6 northeastern states, all Democrat governors. Now a 7th state has joined with that. That's Massachusetts, whose governor is Republican. And that's led in large part by Andrew Cuomo to kind of figure out what might happen in the Northeast states, where many of you are listening right now. And then the same thing on the West Coast, led in large part by Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, working with the West Coast, which would be California, Oregon, and Washington. And so these are an attempt to sort of think about what kind of rollout. And the things that has really messed all of this up, unfortunately, in this case, is the president. Because the other day he said, when somebody is the president of the United States, the authority is total. That's the way it's got to be. It's total. Governors know that. And that led to quite a reaction. I love the one from Brett Baier, who is a host on Fox News. He said, you know, this claim that he has total authority. He said conservative heads would have exploded had former President Barack Obama said the same thing. And I think it just shows you kind of the flip-flop from this president, who has not been in the political sphere, maybe is never even aware that there's a 10th Amendment. I don't know. But just a few days ago was talking about federalism in the right sense. He actually said, we have this thing called the Constitution at one of his news conferences, and the governors have to issue their own stay-at-home orders. I want the governors to be running things. So far, so good. Matter of fact, there was a very good article in The Federalist, why states governing themselves during the coronavirus outbreak is a good thing, and they gave credit to the president. And then you turn right around, and the president says he has total authority to restart the economy. So one of the reasons I've posted this particular article from CNN, it's a quote from Representative Liz Cheney, who is the 3rd highest ranking House Republican. Because as you might imagine, lots of people that don't like the president have criticized this, but also individuals that would be somewhat supportive of the president have simply said, you know, Mr. President, there is a 10th Amendment, and the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states, respectively, and to the people. And so you don't have ultimate authority. You don't have ultimate power. You don't have total power. And that is something that later he's backtracked on and even admitted and said he didn't even say it in the first place. But I think we know better on that one as well. So when we come back from the break, we'll get into some other issues and some of the threats to liberty, because that's my Viewpoints commentary, and also an action alert for you. But at a time when the president's ego's kind of on full display, this comes from the Treasury Department, where they've decided to hold up sending out some of the stimulus checks because they wanted to print President Donald Trump's name on it. Those of you that have been giving to the IRS, sending money to the IRS through your bank, may have already received your $1,200 fund or your $2,400 check. But the printed checks, well, they're going to have to wait a little bit because the president has to put his name on it. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We are told by medical experts and politicians that we have to set aside many of our constitutional rights during the lockdown in order to keep people safe. And we're assured that this sacrifice of our freedoms is only temporary. But are we setting a precedent? Who would have predicted that a virus would become the justification for some governors and mayors to lay siege to our civil liberties? 6 months ago, if I told you that political leaders would close down nearly every church service, even on Easter, and close down huge sectors of our society, would you believe it? Even many of the most dedicated preppers would have had difficulty believing it, yet here we are. A retired UK Supreme Court justice explained his concern. The real problem is that when human societies lose their freedom, it's not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It's usually because people willingly surrender their freedom in return for protection against some external threat. And the threat is usually a real threat, but usually exaggerated. The other side of that equation is also disturbing. Not only do citizens willingly give up their freedoms, but governments are traditionally reluctant to give up power once that was granted to them during a crisis. Once we give government leaders power, they find it hard to return to the previous status quo. Some of the worst threats to freedom can be seen in other countries when government leaders implement the most draconian rules and regulations. America's dedication to limited government and federalism have provided some protection against such action so far. But let's remember that we have had some governors and mayors threaten to permanently close down churches, gun stores, and a number of other establishments. That's why we need to make sure we aren't setting a precedent during this pandemic crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also give you a program note. Later this hour, we're going to spend some time talking with Dr. Michael Austin, how Christians founded health care and hospitals. I think it's kind of a break, at least a little bit, from talking about the coronavirus. And also just a reminder that because of the and if you will, the dedication of Christians in the past and really the advancement of the gospel. That's why we have hospitals, and that's why we have such incredible health care. And in the next hour, we're going to also talk about some other ways in which people have been trying to be a little more creative. You have Human Coalition's virtual clinic model, which we'll talk about. Of course, telemedicine is something that is taking place right now. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And one of the things I want to hold up here is one of the booklets I have on constitutional interpretation, because we're starting to see an erosion of some of our constitutional rights. And I want to talk about that for just a minute. And interestingly enough, that is one issue that we will talk about today. It's also relevant to my commentary, which is entitled Losing Liberty, where I remind you that oftentimes in the past, individuals have lost their freedom, lost their liberty, number one, because they were voluntarily willing to give it up because of some threat, which may have not just a perceived threat. It might have been a real threat, but maybe exaggerated. And then the second problem is that when it came time to get back to normal, government, having used that power, didn't want to give it up quite so easily. So that is one of those issues that we need to pay attention to. And some of the examples that we have used, you've heard them before, but again, since people tune in and tune out, maybe they don't know all the stories. But you have the churchgoers in Mississippi that were ticketed $500 for attending a drive-in church, even though everyone stayed in their cars. Now, we do hear from the Attorney General, William Barr, that he's going to be investigating that. I think those will probably be set aside, but nevertheless, that's the case. And, of course, you've had the injunction that was actually implemented due to the work of our friends at First Liberty, and Kelly Shackelford will be in studio with us on Friday to talk about that. You have the governor in Kentucky, for example, recording license plates of individuals that went to that Easter service event, and then would order them into a 14-day quarantine. They were even taking pictures and writing down the license plates of some of the reporters. So we'll see whether we put them there as well. We've all, of course, heard the story of that dad. It was in Colorado, who was playing catch with his daughter that was handcuffed in front of her 6-year-old daughter. But later, of course, at least we got an apology in that case. And, of course, we love to tell the story of the paddle boarder that was in California, actually just out there paddling out in the ocean. When he got to the beach, he was chased down by the deputies and ticketed. And in that case, he was actually handcuffed. And then others were ticketed for watching a sunset and on and on. And so it's kind of like we've given some of our government leaders the proverbial inch, and they've taken a mile so far with our liberties. So that is an issue that we have identified, and something that I think you certainly should pay attention to. And perhaps the best example of some of the pushback took place today in Lansing, Michigan. For our listeners up in Michigan, if you're near Lansing, you don't want to go there right now. The traffic is backed up because the Operation Gridlock is in full force, complaining in protesting some of the actions by Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who we have heard may actually want to be on the ticket with Joe Biden, so we'll see where that goes. But what we are starting to run into is not only the loss of liberty, but the loss of privacy. And that gets to my little booklet that we produced in the past, A Biblical View on Privacy and Surveillance, because we're starting to see that this issue of privacy is becoming another topic. Today we have, for example, McHenry County. The health department refused to provide the names of individuals who were patients who had the coronavirus, COVID-19, to the police. But a judge overruled them and actually says and forces now the health department to provide names of all the COVID-19 patients to the police. Now, that, first of all, seems to violate the Constitution. It seems to violate the HIPAA rules, but maybe some of you that work in the area of medicine can help me out on that one. And more importantly, we're also seeing that there is a real desire to begin to track down some of these people. And this particular article points out that as countries around the world edge towards ending these lockdowns and restarting their economies, citizens are being closely monitored. And you have, of course, seen what has happened in China, where you have had all sorts of monitoring through surveillance cameras, through GPS tracking on the phones, even through drones that fly through as well. Many of those drones now being provided for other countries. I think South Korea is using them. I think Singapore is using them. Oh, I found one police department in California is using them so far. And so we're getting to a point now where you're starting to lose some of your, if you will, your freedom and your privacy. And the argument being made that, indeed, we need to use every surveillance system. We need to use GPS location data. We need to gather as much medical data. We need to alert the police if you've had the virus, and on and on. And then that's led to the talk, at least it's only talk right now, of having immunity passports where you would have to have identification. Now, I have been talking lately about what has happened in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You may have noticed the other day that the governor of Virginia, who we've talked about many times before, actually signed a bill that struck down all the voter ID laws. It was one of about 36 states that have voter ID laws. Even the other 14 have something that actually protects against voter fraud, but they struck all those down. So now you have a situation where you don't have to have ID to vote, but you might have to have an ID to go out of your house. If that strikes you as odd, it should. And when you have Bill Gates and others saying, maybe we should implant a chip in individuals. I know, let's put it on their hand or on their forehead if they don't have a hand, and we'll let them buy and sell. And I'm just being facetious, but just barely, of the kind of work that is being done right now. And so I think it is going to be a real challenge for us in the future, number one, to know where our elected leaders stand on these issues and decide to vote them in or vote them out in November. Also support some of these religious liberties, civil liberties lawsuits and law groups that are doing this and addressing that. But also sometimes just stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. So those are just a few issues that I want to put on the table today. But let me, if I can, encourage you to go to our website right now. You will see that the middle section there is an opportunity for you to contact your 2 United States senators. You may not know, but it is, I think, a sad fact that a majority of the active pharmaceutical ingredients for drugs that we use in this country come from China. And that means China really controls those ingredients. And as a matter of fact, at one point even had a veiled threat that if you keep working against us or criticizing us, we might just shut down that supply chain. And that's all the more reason why I think we should express to our 2 United States senators that we support this particular piece of legislation being proposed by Senator Tom Cotton. It's called Protecting Our Pharmaceutical Supply Chain from China Act. Don't need to know the name because all you need to do is go to pointofview.net, click on that middle button there. Just put down your name, address. If you've done this before, it will already surface all the information. But if it's the first time you've ever done it, just put down your name, address, email address. And then once you do that, you can submit that and show your support to your 2 senators. It will already, of course, know who your senators are because of the state that you put down there. And so I wanted to give as many of you an opportunity to support a very important and concrete piece of legislation that we think is deserving of a great deal of attention during this pandemic. Next week, I want to talk about some others because we want to start talking to these governors about opening up the economy in a careful and selective way. So this one is the first of a couple of action items we wanted to give to you. And if you're finding yourself sheltered at home and saying, I really would like to let my elected officials know how I think on some of these issues, we've made it possible. So go to the website, pointofview.net, middle button there, take action protecting our pharmaceutical supply chain. That's a lot of big words to simply saying, let's make sure that we have American-made products for American people, that no longer are we dependent on the Chinese government, especially the Chinese Communist government. And so if you would like to express your opinion to your 2 senators, we've made it very easy to do so. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rich legacy of Christians founding both healthcare and hospitals. All that coming up right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, we've been talking about healthcare for many years. We've been talking about hospitals. From time to time, we've even pointed out the fact that really it is due to Christians that we have so many opportunities to help people in various ways because of the desire to reach out to the poor, to the infirmed, and others. We've quoted certainly from some of the material, as well as done interviews with Rodney Stark, for example, who talks about that in The Triumph of Christianity. And we thought we would come back to this issue again because there was a very good issue that came out a while ago from Christian History on healthcare and hospitals in the mission of the church. And you can actually find a link to that on our website, pointofview.net, or even go to christianhistoryinstitute.org, but we've made it very easy for you to find, and to maybe spend a little bit of time discussing that and help you understand how significant the benefit of Christian influence has been in our society. I want to go back to an individual that's been on the program with us before, Michael Austin. He is a commentator and a communications consultant and also one of the spokespeople for Christian History Institute, also the founder of Publish the Good News, a communications ministry, and an individual that will help us understand a little bit more about the legacy, the very rich legacy of Christian involvement in healthcare and hospitals. So, Michael, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you, Kerby. I hope you're well.
I'm well. I hope you are as well. I assume that you are. And I even had a commentary that came out recently that pointed out that when you look at the tremendous influence of Christianity, there was one writer that even, in a sense, kind of in a funny sort of way, said that even the atheists who deny the value of Christianity are beneficiaries of the blessings of Christianity. It comes from a book by Rodney Stark, America's Blessings, How Religion Benefits Everyone, Including Atheists. And, of course, I mentioned his other book, Triumph of Christianity. So let's talk about the history, because certainly right now there are individuals that are benefiting from Christians who are serving in healthcare. The founding of most hospitals, they usually have a denominational link. They're the Baptist hospital, the Catholic hospital, the Presbyterian hospital, the Methodist hospital. So we sort of know that. But let's take us back into history. Where did this idea of treating the poor and the infirm come from?
Well, probably one of the best examples would be how the Christians responded to the plague of 251 in Europe, this plague, and that's what we're experiencing now. We're experiencing a plague, but this one in 251 decimated Europe. In fact, it wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe, which is it's astounding. When you think about it, what that would be like in America with a population of 300 million. What would it be like if 100 million died from a plague? Of course, that particular one lasted for 15 years. So, a little bit of a different circumstance. But, Stark is a great researcher, and I love what he has said in your comment, and thank you very much for that great introduction to this subject.
Well,
because,
and again, yeah, go ahead.
Well, people, non-Christians benefit from the Christian worldview and how Christians show up in life and how they show up in the world. And in this case, healthcare and hospitals, the reputation that the Christians have throughout the centuries was really started at this time during this plague. And Christians were doing what they do today, not running from disaster or crisis or illness, but running to it to help people. And it's so a part of the faith that it's just woven into the Christian life. After all, our Heavenly Father created us in His own image. So Christians are interested in the body, in the well-being of the person, and that's what they've been doing ever since. One of the greatest stories that relates and teaches us that principle is the story of the Good Samaritan.
And again, one of the things that you mention in the articles here is that how, in some respects, people weren't going to fear death. That plague of AD 251 is where Christians ran in and even recognized to their own possible threat to their own lives, was willing to give their lives if they had to save individuals. But back to the Good Samaritan, another good example that Jesus uses, because we are talking about the fact that here was an individual that wasn't well received by the Jewish hierarchy. And nevertheless, Jesus uses him as an example of what we should do, of not only caring for that individual, taking them to a place where they can be healed, but also paying for any of those expenses. And so that model, which was used by Jesus to illustrate how we should treat our fellow neighbors, was something that these Christians in the first and second and third centuries of Rome actually began to imply and apply and to develop. And as a result, I think the Romans looking at this go, gosh, when we have a plague, I run to the hills. I go to my summer home. These Christians not only are willing to give their lives, but sometimes they're even willing to go and die a martyr's death in the arena. I wouldn't do that for the pagan gods that I believe in. And so in some respects, it explains why Christianity just exploded in the Roman Empire, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And the Romans were in awe of, this is recorded in so many different writings, Philo and others. Justinian, who was a Roman emperor, actually complained to his pagan priests, why can't we do good things for sick people like these Christians do? And they were at a loss to even imagine the attitude, the belief, and the caring of Christians. It amazes people to this day and throughout the centuries. But you have hit on the key to it, and that is our relationship with this thing we call death is a completely different relationship. So, and we're seeing that today, that the Christians are, for the most part, eager to go about their business and eager to help people, get involved with people. This distance principle, of course, is nothing new. Everybody knows that when somebody becomes ill or somebody is sick, has a cold even, they probably want to get by themselves and rest, get plenty of rest, take care of yourself, and heal. Why do we have that attitude? Well, it's the way our Father actually built us, which he did wonderfully from the womb, as David reminds us. He put us together in such a way that he heals us. The body heals itself. It has, just the genius of how it all works is amazing. And I think what we're going to find is that this situation that we're in now, it's nothing new. This has been going on since the beginning of time. But what we're learning so much about even this particular virus, how it works, how it operates. And again, we're doing that because we are engaged with it. The Romans, when you got sick in 250, 251, when the plague began, the principle that they operated on was that illness and sickness was a sign of weakness.
Yes.
And weakness was to be abhorred. And basically what they did with even family members, they just basically took them out onto the sidewalk and let them die.
That's right.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, let me jump in here because we have one of those mandatory breaks. But again, as we've talked about before, then the Christians would come along them and give them food and water, and a lot of them would be healed. Some would die, and even some of the Christians would die, but nevertheless, a great illustration of compassion. We come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of this, but we do have a link to ChristianHistoryInstitute.org. You can download a copy of what we're talking about here today. You can also support the ministry. You can even subscribe to the magazine. So we've made it very easy for you to know a little bit more about healthcare and hospitals in the mission of the church. We'll have a little bit more to talk about right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes as we talk with Michael Austin about how Christians founded health care and hospitals. And let's, if we can, Michael, talk about hospitals for just a minute, because one of the things in that issue talks about Bishop Basil of Caesarea, and how this monk really pioneered hospital. Now, again, most people think, oh, we've always had hospitals. No, again, that's a Christian invention. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Basil was an interesting individual, very much with a background very much like Augustine. Wealthy family. He was had the benefit of the best education of the day. He was actually being groomed to be an orator, as was Augustine, and a rhetorician, intellectual. But you know, I think what happened with him is that the Holy Spirit really got a hold of him.
Yes.
And and he had a heart for his brothers and sisters in the faith. And like many of us, he was he was a beneficiary of good counsel. And a Christian brother came alongside him and advised him that a real Christian cares for the brethren. And this was a completely different attitude, if you will, a lifestyle or view of life that he had experienced, because, prior, as an intellectual, it was really all about him. And I think the Holy Spirit changed his life and made it all about other people, and he became a pioneer, as you have said. He started what became healthcare and the hospital institutions by providing for others. And, the institution of the hospital kind of morphed out of the monastic life. And there was a movement in his time toward monastic life. And also, because the Christians were serving people who were traveling and people who were poor, they instituted something that became known as the poorhouse. Well, these two institutions, monasteries and poorhouses, over time, particularly in the 1500s, far later, at the time of the Reformation, when Christians were breaking out of the Catholic mold of celibacy, monasticism, and that type of Christianity, they began to develop what is known today as the professions or the vocations that everybody in the world has benefited from. And of course, Martin Luther is a good example of this, of being converted from a monk to an educator. And the monastery that he was involved with became a great university, changed the world. So many of the fields that we are aware of today, not just art, architecture, governance, banking, insurance, all of these institutions came out of this amazing communal living that the Christians came up with that produced the hospital, and of course today assisted living, nursing homes, and so forth. In fact, I could share with you a little inside story about this particular issue. By the way, this issue came out in 2009.
Yes.
So we're talking about 10 years ago. At that time, the magazine itself had come back. It was published and distributed in those days by Christianity Today.
Right.
But that ministry took a turn in their ministry, and the magazine came back to the original ministry, Christian History Institute, and Ken Curtis, who started it, was battling a terminal condition, cancer.
Wow.
And he took on this subject, and this was the first issue of a whole new series of magazines that were published that continues today because of Ken's experience with cancer and his love for the Christians to share the knowledge base that had been built up over the centuries.
What a great story. Let me just, before I run out of time here, talk about the fact that we do have a link. And again, this particular issue is more than 10 years old, but it is still available so that you can download a PDF file for that. You could support this idea of supporting Christian History Institute, and you could even subscribe. And so let's talk about that for just a minute, because one of the reasons we try to have you on every once in a while is give people a history lesson, and it seems so appropriate while we're dealing with a pandemic to learn some of the lessons of what Christians actually learned and applied when they faced, whether it was the plague in AD 251, whether it's leprosy during the Middle Ages, whether it was the founding of hospitals and the poorhouse, and even this idea that is in there as well of social welfare and all of the rest. It's a fascinating series of articles, which I wanted people to be able to read, but talk about what's available when people land at the website Christian History missionaryinstitute.org, because this is just one of many great resources for some of our listeners.
Well, at this point, there have been 133 issues of Christian History Magazine. So all of those are available, freely available on the website. You can go on, use the reader, flip the pages, zoom in so that you can read it comfortably on your computer screen. You know, the idea of this that Ken Curtis had was to provide a resource for the home first. It has become a resource for church libraries and also schools, very popular with the homeschooling folks. And so his idea was that people would be able to gather around in the home with this magazine and share these wonderful stories. You have the opportunity on the website to research some of your favorite historical characters or movements within the church. And it's just an awesome collection and resource. By the way, you cannot purchase a subscription to this magazine. It's by donation only. And the supporters of the ministry want people to know that if there's a financial issue, just go ahead and ignore the opportunities to donate and subscribe to the publication at no charge, and it will be sent to you. It's a quarterly magazine, comes out 4 times a year. And by the way, each issue focuses on one topic alone. So this entire issue is about every article. There's about 12, 13 articles in most of the issues. Every one is on the subject of healthcare and hospitals. So you get a very thorough treatment of the subject.
Well, again, Michael, I appreciate you being with us once again, and we wanted to highlight what was issue 101, and we have a link to it so that you can read it online or even download it, and appreciate you being with us today. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of other issues. One of those is, I've been hearing about telemedicine. Well, how can you do a pregnancy resource center? Well, again, our friends at Human Coalition have come up with a great idea, so we're going to be talking with Angie Ivey. Then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. We have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. If you would like to join our conversation this hour, certainly we're going to open up the phones a little bit later because we certainly wanted to get your thoughts about getting America back on its feet and what a reopening looks like, what an exit strategy looks like, what an end game looks like, and certainly we'll be talking about that later this hour. But I thought we would answer another question that many of you have had, and that is, given the fact that we still have these abortion-minded women, are there some things that we can possibly do? And we've had some guests in studio that have talked about how they've tried to work with social distancing and how they've tried to use something that's a little bit like telemedicine. And so I wanted to feature our good friends at the Human Coalition. Of course, Chelsea is on the program with us, and oftentimes when we do a Millennial Roundtable, sits in my chair and hosts that. And so we've talked about our friends at Human Coalition, but they have put together what is called a virtual clinic model. And there's a number I want to give to you for that in just a minute, so you might want to get something to write with. But first of all, let's bring to the microphone Angie Ivey, who is, of course, the director there of the virtual clinic at Human Coalition, and she's been overseeing this kind of innovative clinic to help pregnant women and parents across the state of Texas. But I thought for our national audience, many of you would like to know about this, because you may have a situation in which individuals don't really live close to a pregnancy center, but we can still bring the message of life. So, Angie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I'm really glad to be here.
Let's, if we can, try to explain this for some of our listeners, as I have had a chance over the years to travel to many of the states where we broadcast. I recognize that some of them are out pretty far away from a city center. Oftentimes, pregnancy centers need to be in at least a town or a city that has enough individuals to financially support it. And your visual, if you will, virtual clinic model might be a real alternative for those individuals. So tell us kind of how it came to be in the first place.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. Yes, the virtual clinic we started in Texas started in August of 2018. And it was really one of the first virtual clinics in the pro-life arena. So we were really excited to get it started and wondering how it was going to work. And it is, I have to tell you, it's been very successful since last year in 2019, we had 766 women choose life. So basically how it works, Kerby, is a woman generally finds out that she's a lot of times just taking a pregnancy test that morning and enters into a state of crisis and panic, and will go to her Google app and search for abortion clinic, cheap abortion is the pill. And during that search process, our ad will appear, and she will click on it for a free abortion consultation and call, and within minutes is talking to someone, where the first person that receives that call will be getting some basic demographic information from her, basically name, has she gone to the doctor, last menstrual period, things along those lines, and then she's immediately transferred to a nurse. And a nurse begins to start to counsel her and listen to her and gather information on why is she seeking an abortion, what's going on in her life, what has caused her to reach this conclusion that abortion is the only answer. and gathering information from her. A lot of times it may just be she lost her job, or maybe she has 2 children and can barely feed them, so now what does she do? Also, we will talk to her about options, not just abortion. We're going to talk to her about adoption. We're going to talk to her about parenting. And then we're going to go over the abortion procedures that she could be a candidate for. And during that, we're going to talk truth to her. We're going to tell her about the risks, not only physically, but also emotionally, that impact women after an abortion procedure. And as we're talking to her, our goal is to listen, to insert hope to her. As we're listening, if we find out that she has a physical need as far as rent or needs a better job, we're going to get our social workers to come alongside and get in contact with her to see how we can help there. We're also going to find a local PRC, a pregnancy resource center in her area, to where she can go in and have a free pregnancy test and ultrasound, where she can meet her baby for the first time and see that baby has a heartbeat and is alive. And then we're going to continue to counsel and work with her for several weeks as she's processing through the crisis.
You know, again, one of the things I've said, Angie, over the years is we needed pregnancy resource centers even before abortion was legalized in 1973. And we've needed these virtual clinics long before we actually have had to do the shelter in place, because in some respects, what you did in large part just to reach out to people that maybe weren't close to a pregnancy center are now becoming the model of really the only way, in some cases, some of these pregnancy centers can reach out to abortion-minded women, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's, they're able to speak to a nurse, and what we've learned is that a nurse is one of the most trusted occupations in America and has been for the last 17 years. So being able to be in a crisis and then be able to talk to someone immediately has been very helpful to women to talk to someone who can listen and understand, but also give them facts to help them determine the best decision, for them. And oftentimes by just hearing the truth of what's going on, especially right when they're, considering an abortion, to really have someone sit down and lay out all the facts and put hope in there is very instrumental to them choosing life.
Let's, if we can, take a break. But just before we do so, let's give some numbers out. First of all, if you'd like to join the conversation, maybe you are working in a pregnancy center, you'd like to ask some questions or maybe give your testimony, what's happening, 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. But let's also, if we can, give the number for the Human Coalition's virtual clinic. I have the number here, but I thought I'd let you give it as well, because it is important for individuals as they go to the website, humancoalition.org. They can find it there. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, Angie, give that number and talk about if somebody calls that number, what actually is going to happen as they make that phone call.
Yeah, the number is 888-884-8160. And again, that number is 888-884-8160. When they call that number, they're going to talk to a call representative, and they're going to give their information to the call representative. And depending upon where they live in the United States, then their call will be directed appropriately.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Angie Ivey for a little bit longer. And so let me encourage you to go to the website right now and find some of the information about Human Coalition. But also, I'd love to hear from some of you in the pro-life movement. Maybe you work at a pregnancy center. Maybe you have not heard of the idea of a virtual clinic. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. And we're going to have an open line this hour, because after this, we will spend some time talking about turning the corner. And what are some of the ideas that are being proposed to actually get America back to normal, or at least a new normal? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We are told by medical experts and politicians that we have to set aside many of our constitutional rights during the lockdown in order to keep people safe. And we're assured that this sacrifice of our freedoms is only temporary. But are we setting a precedent? Who would have predicted that a virus would become the justification for some governors and mayors to lay siege to our civil liberties? 6 months ago, if I told you that political leaders would close down nearly every church service, even on Easter, and close down huge sectors of our society, would you believe it? Even many of the most dedicated preppers would have had difficulty believing it, yet here we are. A retired UK Supreme Court justice explained his concern. The real problem is that when human societies lose their freedom, it's not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It's usually because people willingly surrender their freedom in return for protection against some external threat. And the threat is usually a real threat, but usually exaggerated. The other side of that equation is also disturbing. Not only do citizens willingly give up their freedoms, but governments are traditionally reluctant to give up power once that was granted to them during a crisis. Once we give government leaders power, they find it hard to return to the previous status quo. Some of the worst threats to freedom can be seen in other countries when government leaders implement the most draconian rules and regulations. America's dedication to limited government and federalism have provided some protection against such action so far. But let's remember that we have had some governors and mayors threaten to permanently close down churches, gun stores, and a number of other establishments. That's why we need to make sure we aren't setting a precedent during this pandemic crisis. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's have with us for just a little bit longer Angie Ivey with Human Coalition. If you'd like to join us, that number is 800-351-1212. And Angie, I always assume people might know about Human Coalition simply because we've had Chelsea on here so often. And yet I recognize that people are tuning in and tuning out. And they might say, I've never even heard of Human Coalition. Can you give us a little of the backstory there for individuals that maybe are not familiar with the good work that you've been doing over the years?
Oh, yes, I'd love to do that. Human Coalition is one of the largest national pro-life organizations in America. Our president is Brian Fisher. Online for Life basically started in 2009 with Brian and then has grown into a very large organization right now. What we do is we use technology to locate our clients, and that's through, again, like I was talking about earlier, through putting in Google searches for abortion clinics, and our ad will come up, and that allows us to talk to abortion-determined women. Oftentimes, these women do not end up going to a pregnancy resource center. They're going straight to the abortion clinic. So by having our ads come up on Google, it's a good way to be able to meet women that we may not have been able to talk to otherwise.
And again,
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I want to hear from you.
I was just going to say, we have the virtual clinic that we just started, but we do have women's care clinics, which are brick and mortar resource centers around the nation as well.
And again, I wanted to come back and get into a little more of the specifics, but along the way, I wanted to take a phone call or two. So let's head out to North Carolina first. WLPG, Karen, thank you for calling today. You're on with Angie. And if I see the screen here, it looks like you have been through and had abortions. Tell us that story, if you might.
Yes. Well, such a long story, but the point that I'm calling is the cost. It affects everyone, not just the woman and the baby, and how devastating it is, how it's cost me my marriage and my children, my grown children, don't have anything to do with me. And one of them knows, the other two don't. They might know now, but I just feel like God has given me this healing through Rachel's Vineyard and Journey to Freedom, and He wants to use me to reach out to other women to tell them that it is not worth it. That grief that you'll carry for the rest of your life. I was far enough along in the first one that when the doctor put the instrument inside me, I felt my baby's arms and legs go straight out. I'll never forget that. And if I can help other women not have to go through that and live with that, I want God to use me. If He's going to use my voice, this is the first time I've shared this, and I'm just very honored that you're letting me talk on your program.
Well, you just gained a national audience as you did so, and I can remember times when even in teaching a Sunday school class, I've had women stand up and say, I've never told anybody, but Kerby, since you provided a vulnerable opportunity, I want to share it with the 100 people in this room, and in this case, you shared it with a larger number than that. And it brings us back, Angie, to the woman who is abortion-minded, who gives you a call or comes into a pregnancy center. She just wants to get rid of this crisis, but hasn't thought about the long-term implications here. Karen has shared this today. We've had people call in that said, I had an abortion back in the 70s, and I still grieve over it every single day. And so what you're trying to do is pass on to these abortion-minded women the fact that you just want to get rid of this crisis that you're facing right now, but there is a better alternative than simply going to an abortion clinic, right?
That's exactly what we're doing, and I do commend your bravery for coming out in and talking about that today, and my heart breaks for you as you have experienced the ramifications of abortion. But that's exactly what we're trying to do. Many women call in and they're just in a crisis mode. And when you're in a crisis, no matter what it is, your thinking is just, if I just get rid of this problem, then everything will go back to normal. And that's what we are trying to talk and counsel our clients on, is that there is just no going back to normal, that this is a decision that you would make that is going to impact you for the rest of your life. And we want to make sure that women understand that, to not just look at today, to look at, to not tomorrow, a week from now, months from now, years from now on that decision, because it is something that you will remember. So as we come in, we try to talk to them about especially figuring out what is the main reason that they're seeking an abortion, and then see if we can do something to try to help that and alleviate that. And many times we're finding, if they found out that they could get medical help, or if they just need a better job, well, we can help with that. That's solvable. And if we get them, working actively on that, we've had, many women who have changed their minds. For example, we had a woman that just lost her job and was going through a divorce and was living with a friend and just, seeking an abortion due to financial reasons. And one of our social workers came alongside of her. It helped her update her resume, sent her job opportunities in her area, and she went out and found a job within the last 2 weeks, and now has chosen life because she is now able to provide for her 2 children and herself. So that's exactly what we're trying to do, is when women call in with a crisis, is to educate them that on a decision that's going to impact them positively going forward, and also that circumstances can change for the better.
Well, again, just before we let you go, let's talk about how people can connect up with you. First of all, we have 888-884-8160. Of course, we also have the link on the website. But if somebody says, I'm part of a pregnancy center, we're thinking of starting one, but maybe we would need a virtual clinic, can you tell us what kind of resources you might be able to provide for someone else that would want to do something like that in their community?
Absolutely. You can go to Human Coalition and contact us, and we have people that can reach out. And actually, we have Lori Zala, who is who is our National Client Services Sales Director, now is going out and actually working with pregnancy resource centers, and they train them on, how they can start virtual and what we can do for them. But definitely contact Human Coalition, and we will talk to you about your needs and do our best to get you started on that.
Again, one last time, 888-884-8160. Of course, we have that information here. It's also a link to Human Coalition on our website, pointofview.net. And if nothing else, Angie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's been a privilege.
And it was great to hear from Karen. We will open up the phones in the last half hour to give all of you a chance to join the conversation. Maybe you want to talk about the pro-life issue. I'm going to give you a little more information on how we might turn the corner, what is being proposed right now by this particular gathering of individuals that are trying to think through how to begin to get America back on its feet. So we'll talk about that. But also this last half hour, I want to provide an open line for your comments. Maybe you have some thoughts about this pandemic. Maybe you are already more than eager to do what you can to actually get back to work. And I might even give you a comment or two from the governor of Michigan, who's kind of been in the news lately. She was on today and spent some time trying to justify it, and you won't believe one of her answers in that regard, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's, if we can, also encourage you to go to the website, not only to find out about Human Coalition, but to go to that middle section called Take Action, Protecting Our Pharmaceutical Supply Chain, because a majority of the ingredients in many of the pharmaceuticals that maybe you take or your friends, neighbors, coworkers, or family members take are manufactured in China. It is time to bring that supply chain back to the United States, something that President Donald Trump has talked about. It is something Senator Tom Cotton has talked about. And so here is an opportunity for you to contact your two United States senators and say, look, Senator Cotton's bill, Protecting Our Pharmaceutical Supply Chain from China Act, is something we would agree with. And so that's our action item for you today. So if you haven't had a chance to do so, simply click on that middle button there, put your name, address, and information there so that then it will pop up your two U.S. senators, and then it gives you a suggested message that you can send to them. You can make some modifications if you like, hit send, and you will have done your civic duty. So we really want to try to make that as easy as possible. Then probably next week we're going to be giving you an opportunity to contact your governors about this whole idea of what it's going to take to get America back on its feet, how we're going to turn the corner, and what that might look like. So I'm going to come back and give you a little more information on that. But most importantly, this last half hour, I want to give you a chance to ask a question, make a comment, and feel free to do so. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Want to get back into what it's going to take to reopen America. And interestingly enough, there is this council to reopen America. And at first, a lot of people were making fun of it because they said, oh, guess what? Your daughter is on it, Ivanka, her husband, Jared Kushner. But you also have some other people, the economic advisors like Larry Kudlow, the Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. But let's just point out that the list of executives on this is pretty impressive, I think, as well. You have Apple. Tim Cook is on it. New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft, no surprise there. Hedge fund manager Ken Griffin. Condoleezza Rice, who is the former Secretary of State, and even billionaire Mark Cuban. Now, that told me that if nothing else, maybe we have the possibility for something positive, because today, Mark Cuban, who is hardly a Donald Trump supporter, is that fair to say? I think most of you would agree with that, said, I want to do anything I can to help the president. And I thought, what? Did we just hear that right? Yes, I think we did. And that is, everybody recognizes, like this president or not, and certainly some of those people that are going to be giving some advice aren't necessarily Donald Trump fans, to put it mildly, nevertheless recognize what's at stake is the economy. And to come up with a reasonable way to begin to implement this is very significant. Of course, you have the governors putting together some material there as well. You have this kind of Northeast Regional Economic Council that has now developed. And so that is the case. And I love this piece by Michael Brendan Doherty. No one is in charge of reopening the country, because he's making the case that no one should be in charge of the nation's response to the pandemic, because no one person is proven qualified to bear that responsibility on his own, and in all likelihood, no one person could. Then he goes on to say, dealing with a very ugly situation in hospitals in Detroit, Michigan, the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, has taken measures that strike me as extreme. You think, allowing only the sale of products necessary to maintain the safety, sanitation, and basic operations of residences. Suddenly, Home Depot closed its Michigan plant, flooring, and outdoor gardening centers in response to that order. Suddenly, parents who wanted to pick up a car seat could not do so. And, of course, we've talked about some of that as well. So in some respects, these have struck a lot of people as maybe just a little draconian, a little bit extreme. And so because the Michigan governor recognizes that there has put her and the state in some kind of spotlight, she went on today, TV, to obviously talk about this. And she explained, I'm now reading from Brandon Morse, went on today, explained that her orders to stop people from doing everything from traveling to their own properties in different parts of the state to planting gardens within the bound of their own home won't be that big of a deal because, wait for it, there's snow on the ground. Yeah, she did say that. It really said that. Well, it's not any big deal because, after all, there's snow, which has led to a flurry of Twitter posts, if you have any interest in that, because indeed, talking about 30 inches of snow up in the Upper Peninsula. So then I'll just quote from a couple of these Twitter posts, which are pretty hilarious, if nothing else. One say, trust me, as someone who grew up in the Upper Peninsula, 3 feet of snow isn't going to keep most people from going out. Somebody else said, yeah, that's just a light dusting. For a couple of more weeks, it isn't going to be meaningful impact of people's ability to do so because the snow will do that in and of itself. And it says, check the forecast, one of the forecasts where high temperatures over 53 degrees and people are having all sorts of fun. And, of course, it was a little difficult today to drive around Lansing, Michigan, and there's already a petition to recall Governor Whitmer. Where that goes will follow in the future. So obviously no one person is in charge of the reopening, and the president who thinks he has total authority is wrong. But whether he or the governors or a combination thereof, which is probably what's going to happen, takes place, then we're going to have to address a couple of issues. Because right now, if you look at the numbers, we have, the best we can estimate, about 500,000 people, 550,000, that in one way or another have been tested as having the COVID-19 virus. some of which are asymptomatic. A variety of others have never been detected, maybe don't know they are carrying it. But you can see that right now we're dealing with a very low percentage. So that brings us back to the importance of testing. The other day in that confrontation and that disaster, really, of a press conference on Monday, where the CBS reporter was railing against the president, in February, you were working to develop testing. You should have been helping the hospitals. Well, this is one time when I think the president, luckily, was right. We don't need as many hospitals as we thought we were going to need, and we do need testing. And you might say, why do we need so much testing? Well, think this through. If we begin to allow people to go back to their businesses, then they need to have some assurance that, first of all, the people they're working next to are not maybe asymptomatic and might give them the virus. We have had stories, I just saw one the other day, in which the wife apparently had a mild or almost an asymptomatic case. Her husband's in the hospital and almost died. So here you have two individuals, same age. Maybe he had some other health issue, but sometimes it's just hard to tell whether or not an individual is going to come down with that particular virus and a disease in a way that could harm them. And so if you're going to go back to your business, you want to know if the person in the next cubicle, if you work in a cubicle, could possibly pass that on to you. If everybody in that group is tested, then the only concern you have are for the delivery people that come in the door. Or if you deal with a lot of customers, do we know whether they are maybe carrying the virus? So that's going to be really important. And so that's why a lot of people are saying that first priority is testing. The more we can test not only individuals that don't need to be tested, but people that are tested maybe in a more randomized way, we can get an idea, perhaps by the extrapolation of that data using statistics, how many individuals maybe have been exposed to the virus and how many are asymptomatic. So that's going to be for point number one. Number two is obviously then we are going to want to open up certain sectors of the society selectively, and certain areas maybe have a higher priority based upon some of the things we just talked about earlier in the program. But again, since people kind of tune in and tune out, one of the things that's part of the guidelines by the government is whether the incidence of infection is genuinely low. The example I love to use is if you look at the sick map produced by Johns Hopkins University, you will see that a good portion of the Midwest have very few individuals that actually have at least been confirmed to have COVID-19. I'm talking about Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, just to mention a few right off the top of my head on that map. There are whole sections of some of those states that have zero. Even in the state of Texas, which has, of course, the second largest population, a couple of weeks ago, I was able to find that half of the counties in the state of Texas had no one with a confirmed case of coronavirus. So that's going to be more important to see what is or is not there in terms of the incidence of infection. And then, of course, we're going to have to really ask this very fundamental question of tracking individuals. Yes, we have phone apps right now, and that means that Google and Apple can actually determine where you are, unless you've turned that off. Some people have, most people have not. And so could that be used in some way? But again, that's a danger that we've talked about before, and certainly mandating that technology is going to be out of the question. And then here's just a couple of others. Keep your breath to yourself. As you walk by somebody, turn the other direction. Of course, most of us have masks now, and so cover your face if you're walking within 6 feet of an individual, which is almost impossible not to do if you go to a grocery store, although if I see something looking crowded, not that I go to a grocery store more than about once a week, I just go to a different aisle. But nevertheless, do what you can to actually not even have somebody breathe what you are actually breathing. And then, of course, we'll continue to push for a vaccine and a treatment. So when we come back from the break, I'll talk a little bit more about what is in the guidelines. I've already mentioned some of the people that are on these committees, and we'll see what that creates as a possibility of bringing this nation back to some semblance of normalcy. And that, of course, is going to take some time, but better to get started right away to have that honest discussion and to figure out how to do that in a way that keeps people safe and gets the economy back on its feet. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. Let me just mention one thing real quickly that maybe we'll get to in the future, and that is we have talked about this idea of helping out small businesses, and they have what is called the Paycheck Protection Program. And it has hit a lot of glitches. We talked about it about a week and a half ago when Kelly Shackelford was here because the question was, could churches and Christian organizations apply for that? And the answer is yes. And so far, the Small Business Administration reported about 600,000 loans totaling $161 billion has been approved. But the businesses and even some of the ministries saying the money is not being dispersed fast enough. Of course, what they originally had in the budget was about $350 billion as part of the relief bill, and Congress was trying to pass another $250 billion, but then our friends on the other side of the aisle, on the Democratic side at least, and in the House, really balked at that because they wanted to spend so much more money on other items. And so at the moment, they have not been able to bring that additional $250 billion to that $350 billion. And so a lot of people, including the editors of the Wall Street Journal, the editorial board, are saying maybe you ought to fix some of the holes in the program. And the problem has to do with, and this is no surprise, Congress didn't write clear regulations. So the Treasury had to issue guidance and then had to reissue other guidance. And then they had to issue more again every few days because there are new questions from lenders and borrowers, and it's just kind of a mess. And if you're not familiar with it, what it is it allows businesses or nonprofits with 500 or fewer employees to borrow up to 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. And as a result, this would then provide a loan at an interest rate of 1% or a 2-year amortization, or if indeed you still keep those people on the payroll after a set period of time, then you actually see that the loan turns into a gift, if you will. That happens after, I guess, about 8 weeks. Now, then you've also had additional regulations coming out, and one of those I thought I would identify is the Treasury has required that businesses spend 75% of the loan on payroll to qualify for forgiveness. Okay, well, that 75% stipulation isn't even in the legislation that Congress wrote. And, of course, many businesses, maybe even some ministries and churches, spend less than half of their revenue on payroll. And, of course, most of the ones I understand are actually just asking for the loan for payroll. But nevertheless, it's just a good example of how very quickly, when Congress doesn't actually cross every T and dot every I, we end up with a disaster. So there is right now a major set of snafus, if you will, from the small business loan. So I thought I'd just mention that for just a minute, because that, of course, gets us into the next government step, and that is the idea of putting the economy back on its feet. According to this article from The Hill, decisions on reopening and alternatively on intensifying mitigation will be made at the local and state level with guidance from and support from the federal level. And so this is where right now it is not helpful for the president to say, I have total authority. This is a time when we have to have the president and the governors working together as closely as they possibly can. If you didn't join us earlier, we did talk about the fact that it would be a 3-phase rollout. First of all, right now will be this national communication campaign. Then there'll be a community readiness assessment, which will take place between now and May 1st, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. And then finally, through May 15th, will be a ramping up of the manufacturing of more testing kits and personal protective equipment. And, of course, the value of that is really important, because what we have to recognize is we want to know where the safe zones are compared to the hot zones. And that's why one of the requirements for a rollout is an incidence of infection that is genuinely low. That's a direct quote, genuinely low. Second of all, it also calls for a well-functioning, again, that's a quote, monitoring system, which could promptly detect any increase in the incidence of infection. Because, again, as you roll that out, you might have a spike coming up. And if you do, you want to be able to react to that very quickly, which brings us to the final 2 points. You want a public health system that is, as they say, quote, reacting robustly to all the cases of COVID-19, and also a health system that has enough inpatient beds and staffing that it could scale up rapidly if there was a surge in those cases. So they're thinking through some of the implications of this. There'll always, of course, be some things that are unexpected, but nevertheless, that is the case. And tomorrow, we're going to spend some time looking at the arts and a number of other things to take our minds off of the whole pandemic. But I do want to spend just a little bit of time tomorrow talking about Sweden. I've mentioned before that in Sweden there hasn't been a complete COVID-19 lockdown. As a matter of fact, the arguments being made right now by some of the people that write about this, one of whom is the Associate Director for Global Health at Kaiser Family Foundation, is that Sweden has kind of taken a middle path between lockdown and letting it run rampant. But at the same time, it has allowed some things to remain open. That would be restaurants are open, bars are open, playgrounds are open, parks are open, even elementary schools are open, but high schools and colleges are closed down. And so some of that's a little bit puzzling. But one of the other individuals I'll be quoting from tomorrow is Johan Norberg, who's an economics writer who has looked at some of those issues as well. And he has pointed out that the difference is that we follow these recommendations voluntarily, which gives more space for individual knowledge and needs and might even make it more sustainable than a system where everyone is forced to stay at home indefinitely and will eventually rebel. That might actually be the case. And so, again, the death toll right now in Sweden is lower than it is in most European countries like Italy and the United Kingdom. It is higher than what you see in some of the Nordic countries. So I thought tomorrow we'll talk about that a little bit because it does provide, if you will, kind of a control. You know, whenever you do a scientific experiment, you like to have an experiment and a control. And this is almost like a control to kind of compare how much it is due to lockdown and how much is simply due to individuals acting responsibly. But just before we end the program today, let me mention that my Viewpoints commentary today is entitled Losing Liberty. And while we have been told so often that we may have to set aside our constitutional rights temporarily, one of the real questions is not only as we get back into the economy, will we in some way or another regain some of those civil liberties, some of the religious liberties and the rest? And that's why I think we need to pay attention to this. And at the same time, we recognize that there is a real push right now for more and more surveillance. And surveillance has been ramped up dramatically in places like China. But I don't think we would like to live in that kind of country. So these are going to be really important questions once we move maybe from the virus to the issue of civil liberties. And so we'll spend some time tomorrow talking about that. And I suspect it will be probably the big topic that we will have on Friday as we have in studio with us Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. So I hope you join us every single day. And most importantly, visit the website. We have a take action item for you to actually act upon. And I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.